So yes, hand over your questions, but I want to ask the panelists, and again, it was a bit of a question that emerged from your presentation, is what would I do with $1 million, or in this case, $1 billion, right? Because much of the conversation moves beyond what you can do to how do I prioritize some projects? Where do I really want to start, and how do I start this investment? So I'll open it up to anybody who wants to answer.
He's already prioritized his project.
Well, I think like any part of the transportation system, any of the layers, whether you look at the roads or the transit, you got to treat cycling the same way. You build the critical pieces that forms the backbone of the network, so that then the rest of the pieces, the rest of the partners can then join in and build the other connecting pieces as well. So, for York Region, our first priority for our active transportation network is the lake-to-lake route. We think that is vitally important to energizing all of our partners in coming on board and accelerating their own projects.
So can I ask you to repeat the question? I was a little distracted.
The question is, amongst everything that you can invest on, how do you prioritize? Where do you get started? How do you put things on the top of the list?
So we have several tiers of how we prioritize projects in general. It doesn't matter if it's a cycling project, a rapid transit project, a technology project. We talk about the triple bottom line. And we talk about evaluating things on the basis of its benefit to the environment, the economy, and to community. And it sounds goofy, it's so fundamental, but if you don't have quantitative and qualitative data by which to evaluate your projects and go through it in a rational way, we would, to many respects, it's a free-for-all. So it's really important to have hard evidence behind how you evaluate and prioritize. The second part of how we evaluate projects is at Metrolinx is not only that triple bottom line, but then it's the question of the ability to implement. So there are a lot of good projects where in communities that actually are not receptive to the project, so it makes it more difficult. So you kind of place a sort of priority on, is the EA completed? Is the municipality willing to help and assist in the funding? Is the project, physically implementable? Like, is it technically difficult to do? And so we have a prioritization framework, and we actually apply it in a fairly religious way when we present our recommendations to the board. So I would say when you think about other modes of transportation, we've applied this to our rapid transit projects, I'd say the same discipline needs to apply to how you prioritize. This is what helps us step out of the way of the politicization of decision making. And I think one of the things Metrolinx is trying very hard to get to is what are the right first steps? We know because 15 to 20 years of not investing, we have a huge backlog. As we say in the Big Move, all the projects listed in the Big Move, there are no bad projects. Like, there are very few bad because we're so behind. All of Loy's projects are good projects. Mississauga has good projects, but you have to go at them one at a time. And there has to be a recognition that the methodology you're using in your decision making, everyone buys into it. So it's not just what we think is the right way of evaluating, but everyone has to agree to that, and that's so fundamental.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's a really sort of great point, and I think going forward, we're looking forward as municipalities to putting together those multiple account evaluation frameworks to be able to assess our cycling projects against other cycling projects. I think we're ready for that. Let's give us the forms and we'll fill them out. I think from our standpoint, as I said in my presentation, our priorities for investment are those projects that interconnect with the rapid transit stations, because we want that rapid transit network to function well, and we know it needs to be fed by people who can get to those stations easily. Definitely there's lots of local travel by bike and by walking that we need to support through our own municipal networks, but really if it's coming from the investment strategy, I think the funding needs to go towards cycling networks that help feed that rapid transit network.
And
I think also from our experience, the advice I give is don't underestimate the power of paint and soft tip posts. So it's cheap, it's quick, and it's a good way to do a pilot to see how really does this project work. And if it works really well, then go after the big bucks. But you know, concrete costs a lot of money, but painting and striping is just a political action. You know, so sometimes it's politically expensive, sometimes it's capital expensive, but you've got to choose your expense.
Great. I'm going to have another question. You can jump in again in a minute. One question that came through Twitter. San Francisco, less than 4% of daily trips by bicycle. Is it, what's wrong? Despite the climate? Is it the hills?
It's a reality, you know. It's just the way it is. We're a very walkable city. We have 18% of all trips by walking and 18% by transit, because transit is walking trips. And bicycling, although it's growing, it's still 4% of the mix. So, you know, you should be proud of that number because it's a big number for a US city, for most North American cities. It's just that we have that blue area that I showed you was the flattest, most mixed-use part of the city. Everything else is hilly or low density. So the land use is really determined with the street network what your ridership will be like. It's really critical. They're the two key points.
One question, I think this one's for you, Leslie, is will Metrolinx revenue be allocated to AT initiatives, and what about soft costs, kind of the urban design and some of the landscaping?
So, as I pointed out in that pie chart, 5% of the revenue investment tools have been identified for a range, including active transportation, so yes. What the details of how that program is going to flow out is still not defined, so that's part of what has to be. In fact, I would say the details about the implementation of a lot of the other pieces, like how to actually implement it, whether it's the HSD or the gas tax, that's still yet to be fleshed out. So, so that's my answer.
Great. And I have one last question, and I think it's for all of them, and you got us started. But the question is about, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that people can start to think about? And you talked about buckets of paint, but are there other low-hanging fruit that we can use? There's a fruit basket outside.
I think the example that Jacqueline gave earlier about a servicing project in Mississauga, where a corridor was being created in essence to put a pipe in and take the opportunity to build a path through there. Those types of opportunities exist in every municipality all the time. So it's a matter of making sure that different departments, the different agencies within the municipality realizes that these are opportunities that shouldn't be missed. And the other thing is that with all of these rapid transit projects, hopefully that will be built over the next 15 years or so with this new funding that we're going to get, right, Leslie? That every project, every rapid transit project, I think, needs to have the active transportation component defined as part of the project, because it's in terms of the cost of it, it's such a small component of the overall project cost that I think it's almost a crime not to include it. So it's important that Metrolinx in making its decision on what project to approve and the components of the project, Metrolinx, I hope, will insist that the active transportation component of it is included and is properly designed as part of it.
I was going to add, I think in terms of low-hanging fruit, it's sort of almost a step a bit backwards, and to Tim's earlier in his slide, I talk about TDM. Because I think there is an untapped market. We have our program, the Smart Commute program, which works with the large employers around this region. And I think there's a lot more championship that can happen to encourage the reduction of the number of trips, which in turn begins to assist in the awareness around active transportation as options. So that's number one. The other thing, I just, before we end, I wanted to make sure I made this footnote, which was actually the parting words, closing remarks of our chair at the board meeting this morning, which is to remind folks And ours is now a recommendation to the province. We have made the recommendations. This is our best advice to the province. We now turn to the municipalities and the leadership in the region to embrace our recommendations and to get moving on it. So it's important to recognize that while there's a lot of work still for us to do, the responsibility is now shared because now we have laid out our recommendations, and we hope that others will join us, because it's been a very difficult public debate and it's very hard to get people wholly behind this whole concept. It's not an easy concept, and I don't know that we shouldn't lose sight of that the money is not in the bank yet, folks. You know, we can spend a lot of time, as we do on rapid transit, talking about this project and that project, but the issue right now is the will and the courage to step out and actually support and endorse and recognize the need for this funding.
Yeah, just to add on to I used to work in LA and I was the bank like Leslie, so I get what it was like. A lot of like we should. I would say that, you know, the painting, the striping, and the signage and stuff is really good. But it's really important, first of all, to spend a little bit of time with all the expertise that you have in your teams to look at the needs assessment. Look at those corridors and actually assess them. And you might find that one hotspot, one link in that corridor will actually change a lot of different uses along those corridors, whether it's for transit or for bicycling or for walking. That one or two intersections might be the most important investment you make, and that may be painting, striping, and signage. And then all of a sudden you've created this huge flow for everybody else who wants to use it. And these things cost, you know, thousands of dollars to do these interventions. But it's just having that time to look at what are the needs and where are the hotspots. And I really strongly recommend focusing on those hotspots. And then, you know, calling her every day, where's my money?
Loy,
Thanks,
Leslie, Jacqueline, Timothy, thank you very much.